On this episode of Charged and Disbarred.
There were stories of what they used to call bimbo eruptions.
I did not have sexual...
He had an affair with a 21-year-old intern. I'd be fired for something like that, and I should be fired for something like that. In 68, he was struggling. In 72, he was in the driver's seat, which makes the dirty tricks hard to understand. And then you have to start protecting the lies and the crimes and the cover-ups.
Judges and attorneys are like kings and knights in their own realm. It is unthinkable that in a moment of madness it can all be thrown away. Charged and Disbarred explores the true life stories of attorneys who have fallen from grace. Hear firsthand accounts from the victims, detectives, and prosecutors who brought these disgraced attorneys to justice. This is Charged and Disbarred. 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, once wrote in a letter to a friend, "Always bear in mind that your own resolution to succeed is more important than any other one thing." Such a sentiment was clearly embraced by the subjects of this episode, Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton, men who both rose from poverty to become the most powerful men in the world.
I'm Michael Jenilee. I'm the president of the World Policy Institute here at Loyola Marymount University. I've been here for 36 years. I've written 50 books, mostly about the presidency and about political leadership. So I go around the world and give lectures and give presentations and hold seminars. My interest in the presidency really stems from the fact that it is the epicenter of American politics. And I'm fascinated by how people try to play the game of power and the hidden wiring of politics. Who really pulls strings?
The 42nd President of the United States, William Jefferson Bill Clinton, was born on August 19, 1946 in Hope, Arkansas. Tragically, his father, William Blythe, died 3 months before his birth in an automobile accident. From birth, he was introduced to a life wrought with challenges. Life would not be served on a silver platter for this boy. He would have to learn to be much more than a survivor. The young Clinton was an above-average student with a keen intellect. In his years as a student at Hot Springs High School, he was an active student leader, an avid reader, and showed promise as a saxophone player. Things at home, however, were a different story.
His mother married a few times. When she married Clinton and he took the Clinton name, the father was fairly abusive. And as a child, Bill Clinton had to basically save his mother from physical harm by an abusive father. That's not a healthy environment in which to grow up, but it is an environment that teaches you certain skills. He grew up in a world of women. And his mother was a larger-than-life kind of figure, just like her son. She liked to gamble and have fun and a little bit of a wild person, and Bill was this kind of stabilizing influence in that family, almost as if he had to take on the role of a father from a very early age.
Even at such an early age, long before Bill Clinton saw public office, he was learning the skills that would prepare him for the presidency.
Many presidents have a very strong connection to their mothers, just as many female leaders have a very strong connection to their fathers. Why? What that does for you is it allows you to be a bit of a gender bender. That is to say, if Bill Clinton focuses on pleasing his mother to gain attention, to gain approval, he learns skills on how to deal with women. Or in the case of, say, Margaret Thatcher, who idolized her father, she learned how to deal with men in power. You see it in a lot of presidents: Lyndon Johnson, Franklin Roosevelt, Nixon. You see it in George W. Bush. You see it in Barack Obama. The female image of authority. They learn to work with and deal with, and even sometimes manipulate a woman.
Bill Clinton had a sense that he was called to something greater than himself. In 1963, at the age of 16, a meeting with another charismatic leader led Bill Clinton to make a decision that would ultimately have historical implications.
There are moments, events in a person's life that change you. Bill Clinton had such a moment. It was when he went to Washington, D.C. and met John Kennedy.
To achieving the goal before this
I am of an
decade is out,
age that I remember as a kid John Kennedy. The wit, the charisma, a compelling figure. He inspired people to get involved in public life. He did that for Bill Clinton. And he's been very open about it. Clinton has said, from that moment on, I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to get in public service. That's the kind of influence a leader can have. Who knew this kid that you meet would one day sit in the chair that you sat in?
With his life's purpose set, Bill Clinton sought and obtained education and scholarly achievement at some of the finest institutions in the world. He was laying the academic foundation for greatness.
Bill Clinton went to Georgetown University, highly selective, private Jesuit university in our nation's capital. His academic performance was top-notch. His professors all said, he's a great student, great mind, and it's something we know. He's smart as a whip. He did well enough to become a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford University, where he met a few people who were in his administration, people who he became friends with for life. After that, going to Yale Law School, one of the top in the world, he went to the elite schools. And what's unusual is he came from such a poor background, such a deprived background.
He earned 2 college degrees, a Bachelor of Science in Foreign Service, and a Juris Doctorate.
The President of the United States of America, William Jefferson Clinton.
On January 20th, 1993, Bill Clinton was inaugurated as the 42nd President of the United States. With his wife Hillary and daughter Chelsea by his side, his time had arrived. He was the leader of the free world, and he was ready to leave his mark.
Bill Clinton had a tough time in many respects in his first term, in part because Washington had become, by that time, highly partisan. He appointed his wife, who was the First Lady, to head the team that was to propose and to push for health care. Probably a mistake. A lot of the old guard males resented, number one, a woman doing it, and number two, an unelected woman, and number three, Hillary Clinton herself. They just didn't warm up to her, especially the Republicans.
It was not only in Clinton's public life that he was experiencing ups and downs. His private life would also come under the spotlight.
When Bill Clinton was running first for office, for the presidency, there were stories of what they used to call bimbo eruptions. Stories of women who claimed to have had relations with Clinton, or women who said that he had sexually assaulted them. So from the time before he was elected president, when he first got on the national scene, there was the Jennifer Flowers revelation. She was a woman who he allegedly had relations with. She was paid money by one of the tabloids to tell her story, and it was lurid and it was bad soap opera. And so from when he first burst onto the scene, he had to deal with that. That would have derailed most politicians. Somehow, again, because he's smart and he's a fighter, people identified with his middle-class policies. It didn't break him, but it injured him, and he was always kind of the walking wounded. And it enlivened his opposition. It strengthened the opposition. It coalesced the opposition so that they had something to shoot at, something to really focus on and dislike.
Despite these and various other controversies, Clinton remained popular and romped to victory for a second term, claiming over 70% of the Electoral College votes. Bill Clinton was now ensured the opportunity to leave a great legacy as president. But then on January 21st, 1998, an allegation against President Clinton became public that would shock the American public to their core. Bill Clinton was accused of having an affair with a 21-year-old White House intern named Monica Lewinsky.
He had an affair with a 21-year-old intern. I'd be fired for something like that, and I should be fired for something like that. How do you forgive someone for doing that?
I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky.
At first,
never
Clinton
told
denied the
anybody it's a lie.
allegations and vigorously opposed the investigation.
How did we find out about it? Monica Lewinsky developed a friendship with Linda Tripp, a disgruntled government employee, and she revealed what had happened. Tripp saw this as her ticket. She went to the FBI, they set her up with taping materials, recording devices, and she got Monica Lewinsky to tell the story. They took that to the special prosecutor, Kenneth Starr. He expands the scope of the investigation. And he felt, I've got him. And so that's when they asked the president under oath, do you know this Monica Lewinsky person? And that opens the floodgates. Ken Starr at the end gives a massive report to the Congress.
Eventually, in July of 1998, immunity was granted to Monica Lewinsky in exchange for grand jury testimony regarding her affair with the president. It was also at this time that she turned over the now infamous semen-stained blue dress to the investigators, thus providing indisputable DNA evidence that would prove the relationship, contrary to Clinton's denials.
Good evening. This afternoon in this room, from this chair, I testified before the Office of Independent Counsel.
President Clinton admitted during grand jury testimony that he had had an improper physical relationship with Lewinsky.
It was greatly distressful to the nation. It embarrassed the president. He had to finally go public after saying, "I did not have sex with that woman, Monica Lewinsky." A few weeks later, he said, "I had an inappropriate relationship with her." And that led to the Republicans in Congress passing a resolution of impeachment, which went to the full House, and it was basically obstruction of justice and perjury charge. The Republicans had a majority in the House. They passed the impeachment, so he was impeached. The next step is, was he convicted? So they put on a formal trial in the Senate. The Supreme Court Chief Justice presides. The members of the House brought the case to the Senate. They argued their side. President Clinton brought in his attorneys. They argued their side. The Republicans failed to get even a majority vote on one of the charges. And that's because several Republicans decided this is way too small an issue to impeach and convict on. And so was Clinton exonerated? His popularity was over 60%. The public didn't want impeachment. They didn't want conviction. The Senate did not convict.
Bill Clinton survived impeachment and remained in office. However, that was not the end of his legal problems. U.S. Federal District Judge Susan Weber Wright found Bill Clinton in contempt of court for giving false testimony and was fined over $90,000 by Judge Wright. In 2001, his license to practice law in Arkansas was suspended for 5 years. However, he never sought reinstatement and is still ineligible to practice law. For most lawyers, suspension or disbarment is their worst nightmare come true. Their career is devastated and their lives shrouded in shame and embarrassment. That seems to have not been the case for the 42nd president. When he left office in 2001, Bill Clinton's approval rating was 68%, only matched by Ronald Reagan and Franklin D. Roosevelt. This level of popularity translated into exorbitant earnings from speaking engagements and other activities. It has been reported that Clinton earned more than $104 million from paid speeches between 2001 and 2012. Bill Clinton's resolution to succeed led him from humble beginnings to the leader of the free world. The odds were always stacked against Clinton, but he fought back with force, charm, and charisma. However, what is also clear from his presidency was that his resolution to succeed was nearly derailed by his weaknesses and shortcomings. Still to come on Charged and Disbarred.
In 68, he was struggling. In 72, he was in the driver's seat, which makes the dirty tricks hard to understand. And then you have to start protecting the lies and the crimes and the cover-ups. You don't need to do that. Why would you?
This is Charged and Disbarred. Richard Milhouse Nixon was born on January 9, 1913 in Yorba Linda, California. He was named after Richard the Lionheart, King of England. King Richard, however, was born a king in a palace, whereas Richard Nixon was born a commoner in a house built by his father. But despite his humble beginnings, Richard Nixon also possessed the heart of a lion, which gave him the strength and courage to battle his way out of abject poverty to become the leader of the free world. Nixon's childhood was marked by adversity and misfortune. As the Great Depression approached, the Nixon family farm failed like so many others, and the Nixons were forced to move to Whittier, California. Shortly thereafter, Rich's brother, Arthur, died of an unknown illness at the age of 6. These were tough times, but this closely knit family of faith made the best of it. In reference to those years, Nixon once said, "We were poor, but the glory of it was we didn't know it."
Richard Nixon grew up in Yorba Linda in Southern California, and he would tell later on stories of sitting in his room at night listening to the train whistle go by and his dreams of getting out of Whittier and becoming someone special. In school, he was a very hard worker. He was always that guy who tried harder than everyone else. He loved sports, but was a terrible athlete. But he went out for the football team at Whittier College, and they referred to him more as jokingly as the tackling dummy. He didn't really play. But he wanted so to be a part of that.
This future Republican president would not find glory on the gridiron, but instead on the debate stage. He won several debating championships in high school and college. Nixon's secret to debating and public speaking success laid in the tutelage he received from H. Lynn Scheller, the head of English at Fullerton Union High School. He recalled Scheller's words, "Remember, speaking is conversation. Don't shout at people. Talk to them. Converse with them." Nixon applied this technique to great effect throughout his political career.
Nixon went to Duke Law School, which was a new law school at the time. He got a scholarship, which he needed because he didn't have the financial means to fund his law degree. Did very well academically, but admitted that he got by hard work. After he passed the bar, he applied to the FBI for a job. He wanted to be an FBI agent, and they rejected him. Again. All the Eastern elites from Harvard and those schools are getting into the FBI, and I can't. He then went home and practiced law a little bit, but his heart was not in it. His heart was in politics. Tried a few small businesses that failed, but always with an eye towards how do I angle into the political arena. And so the first chance he got, he ran for office. And even after he lost the presidency in '60, governorship of California in '62, when he went to New York to practice law, he wasn't practicing much law. It was a law firm that did a lot of political work, and so for Nixon, a legal career wasn't what he did. It was the segue between what he did, which was politics.
The next few years would see him get married and begin working as a commercial litigation attorney for the firm Wingert & Bewley in California, until the Second World War broke out.
Right after World War II, veterans were really highly regarded. They were celebrities. They stopped fascism. And so to be a vet mattered. Nixon leapt at that opportunity. He was in the Navy during World War II, didn't really see combat, but it didn't matter that you didn't get involved in fighting. What mattered is that you were a veteran and you were honored. Once the vets got back, Kennedy in Boston, Nixon in California, they, as quickly as they could, got into the stream of politics and electoral politics. And when they ran, they always let you know that they were a veteran.
Nixon started his political career in 1946 when he sought to represent California's 12th congressional district. Nixon won his first political campaign with nearly 57% of the vote. Once in Washington, Nixon quickly began to establish his anti-communist credentials. Nixon's abilities as a political campaigner and a shrewd politician soon earned him the nickname of Tricky Dick amongst his political opponents. However, it was not only his opponents that noticed his prowess as a politician. Nixon's profile both nationally and in the Republican Party increased dramatically with his election to the Senate in 1950. In 1952, General Dwight D. Eisenhower was nominated as the Republican Party's candidate for president. During the discussion of who should be Eisenhower's running mate, party leaders strongly recommended Nixon as the vice presidential nominee. On the advice of his leadership team, Eisenhower accepted Nixon as his running mate. Eisenhower would find Nixon very useful on the campaign trail, as Tricky Dick relished the negative and combative campaigning, allowing Eisenhower to stay above the political fray and focus the public on his plans for the country.
He was not especially visible. He had a very controversial trip to South America, and he toiled in the vineyards of Republican Party politics. He went all over the country, speaking night after night at a dinner in Biloxi, Mississippi, and 2 nights later you're in Brownsville, Texas, and 3 nights later you're in Phoenix, Arizona, and then you go up to do the Northern Circuit. It's not a fun life. It's a chore. Many vice presidents didn't do those things because they didn't look in the mirror in the morning and see a president of the future. Nixon always did. And so he tried to use the vice presidency as a stepping stone. And in that he made considerable progress.
Nixon duly entered the race to become the next president of the United States and comfortably secured the nomination as the Republican candidate for president. His Democratic opponent was the young, good-looking, wealthy, and well-connected John F. Kennedy. The election was a very close race, with Nixon emphasizing his considerable advantage as an experienced and hardworking politician, and Kennedy countering with the need for the United States to have a fresh and new direction under a dynamic new leader. For Nixon, in spite of all the campaigning and hard work, things did not go as planned. The presidential campaign of 1960 marked the first time debates would be broadcast live on television. This seminal event would ultimately prove a decisive advantage for the Democratic candidate. During the first debate, Kennedy appeared calm and in control, and his natural charm and charisma was well suited for this new meeting. Nixon appeared pale and was sweating excessively. The effect of the candidate's appearance on camera was undeniable. Those who watched the broadcast favored Kennedy. Those who listened on the radio favored Nixon as the winner. In the end, Kennedy won the election by a razor-thin margin of less than 0.2% of the popular vote.
Nixon's loss in 1960 to John Kennedy had a profound impact on him. Losing to Kennedy was the epitome for Nixon of losing to the establishment, of losing to the East Coast elites, of losing to old money, all the things he didn't have. And so for Richard Nixon, the loss to anyone would have been pretty tough to take. The loss to Kennedy was especially devastating. And at some point, he becomes obsessed with the Kennedys in a negative way. With Robert Kennedy, whom he thought was going to run against him in 1968, would have, and almost certainly would have won. The Kennedys represented something to him, something that he didn't have, that he always wanted.
Losing the election by such a small margin was clearly devastating to a man with Nixon's ambition. The pain of the loss was compounded not just by losing to a Kennedy, but by the manner in which he lost. There were charges of vote fraud in Texas and Illinois, both states won by Kennedy. Though Nixon refused to contest the election because he felt a protracted controversy would diminish the United States in the eyes of the world, that did not diminish the anger and resentment Nixon felt. These feelings grew and festered and led him to develop the legendary suspicion and distrust that would become the hallmarks of his future presidency.
Nixon was a fighter. 2 years later, he runs for governor of California against Governor Brown, the incumbent, and he loses again. And that's when he gave his infamous goodbye to the press when he said, "You don't have Richard Nixon to kick around anymore." And everyone thought it was the end. Nixon thought it was the end. But that hunger, that drive, he just couldn't stop.
By 1967, the political climate in the United States was changing rapidly, and the Democrats were becoming increasingly divided over the issue of the Vietnam War. Nixon saw his chance and decided to run for president again. This time, Nixon was prepared for the TV cameras. Nixon found the winning formula in his second quest for the White House and won the 1968 presidential election and was inaugurated as the 37th President of the United States on January 20th, 1969.
His 1972 victory, a landslide victory, is very different from 68. 68, it was a hot, contested election. Vietnam on the front page. 4 years later, Henry Kissinger was talking about peace is at hand. Nixon had the success of China, the success of the Soviet Union, détente. In 68, he was struggling. In 72, he was in the driver's seat, which makes the dirty tricks hard to understand. You don't need to do that. Why would you? But if you look at Nixon from a psychological perspective, which is difficult, but I think you need to do to the extent that we're able, you can see why he might have done the overkill that he did.
Telltale signs of his state of mind was becoming obvious, as evidenced by comments he made after he won the 1972 election.
There's an ironic story. The night of his 1972 landslide re-election, one of the biggest victories in the history of presidential politics. Now, if that were me, I'd be celebrating. He went and dictated a response, and one of the lines was, "Tonight I feel no joy."
Worse was yet to come. On the night of June 17, 1972, a group of men led by James W. McCord was caught breaking into the Democratic National Headquarters at the Watergate Hotel complex.
That was what opened the door to investigations. It didn't affect his 72 campaign, but after the campaign was over, Woodward and Bernstein of the Washington Post, the New York Times, and others began to look into the money trail. the famous Deep Throat line, follow the money. And once they started following the money, it went right back to the White House. And once you started to piece it together, it grew and grew and grew. Almost from the beginning, within the first week after the break-in, Nixon's in his office with his chief of staff, H.R. Bob Haldeman, and the conspiracy begins with Nixon's involvement. He, along with Haldeman, tried to get the FBI to block the investigation of the Watergate. And they used the excuse, it'll open a can of worms on foreign affairs in Cuba. We don't want them to go there, it'll embarrass other president. That's an obstruction of justice. We have it on tape.
Hello, Mr. Haldeman. We have had the president before it's coming.
And then you have to start protecting the lies and the crimes and the cover-ups. And it just expands exponentially until everything just collapses. It collapses when it was revealed in a Senate hearing that Nixon had been taping himself. Those tapes were immediately subpoenaed. Nixon refused to give them to the investigators or to the courts. It required a lawsuit, and the Supreme Court unanimously, 8-0, argued and decided that he had to give up the tapes in a criminal case. Once it was revealed what he actually said and did, in his own words, it was over. And so there's a tragic quality to both Nixon personally and politically. And it almost has the quality of a Greek tragedy, as if from the beginning of the play, you can see that the hero is flawed and that flaw will bring him down. And that's what Nixon said in exasperation. I gave them a sword. And they used the sword. And so how was Nixon brought down? By his own acts, by his own treachery, by his own illegal activities. He can't blame his critics. It was his actions that did it.
The specific purpose of the break-ins is still a subject of debate, but there is consensus that the burglars were attempting to photograph campaign documents and install listening devices in telephones.
Good evening.
The Nixon administration immediately denied any involvement and took extensive actions, both public and private, to thwart the investigation. The mounting evidence against Nixon and his transparent efforts to obstruct the investigation set in motion impeachment proceedings in the House of Representatives. Rather than face impeachment, Nixon decided to do what no other U.S. president has ever done. He resigned. Nixon never admitted any wrongdoing, but rather chose to say mistakes were made. In an attempt to avoid further embarrassment, he decided to resign from the California bar and the bar of the U.S. Supreme Court following his resignation in 1974. His attempt at resignation from the New York bar was rejected, as the bar required that he sign a statement under oath confirming that he was innocent of obstructing justice. He refused, and the state bar's disciplinary agency disbarred him in 1976. After he resigned, Nixon and his wife Pat retired to the small California coastal town of San Clemente. Richard the Lionheart Nixon showed great resolve to succeed throughout his extraordinary life. How will he ultimately be remembered and judged is a debate perfectly captured by historian and political scientist James McGregor Burns when he wrote, "How can one evaluate such an idiosyncratic president, so brilliant and so morally lacking?"